While Hans had a lot of experience as a farmer, nothing could have prepared him for what happened on the day he found some strange eggs on his crops. His fields were full of corn just a week before the strange eggs appeared, and when they hatched, it would be the shock of Hans's life. Welcome to Wonderbot Animals. Hans, his wife Bonnie, and their daughters, Mary and Giselle, were silent. Their field was full of corn just a week before. But on that day, instead of corn, they found strange eggs scattered all over the place. They looked like they were about to hatch, but Hans decided it would be best to destroy them with his tractor. However, his daughters intervene. The girls jumped in front of the tractor and didn't want to move. They thought their father was being insensitive. There were living beings about to be born. How could he destroy them? Eventually, Hans would suggest something that would shock his daughters. But before we understand why, we have to go back to the beginning. Hans lived on a farm with his family and they were very modest. Hans grew vegetables, including corn, and he owned a flock of sheep as well. The work was hard but very fulfilling, and the family was comfortable with living on a farm. It was a simple life with a steady routine, so nothing out of the ordinary happened. That morning, Hans woke up very early like any other day. He put on his overalls and went to the kitchen. While he was there, he heard a strange noise coming from outside. It was still dark, so he couldn't see where the strange sound was coming from, but he had never heard anything like that before. It gave him a strange feeling. Then his wife Bonnie showed up and she startled Hans, who was already on edge. He was about to go outside to investigate the sound when his two daughters came downstairs as well, so he was distracted and went on with his day. When everyone finished their breakfast, it was finally time for Hans to go out and feed his animals, starting with the chickens. That day, the chickens were acting differently. They walked around the coop like they were afraid of something. Hans also noticed one of the chickens was missing. He was looking for it when he saw a small pile of feathers on the floor, and he knew that meant the chicken was dead. Maybe taken by an animal. Though a bit shaken by the missing chicken, Hans continued his rounds and approached the pigs. They were making louder sounds than usual. He fed the pigs, and they were quiet again for a brief moment. There was something strange going on. Hans could feel it. He just didn't know what just yet. Then, suddenly, he heard that strange sound again. He listened carefully, but he couldn't tell where it was coming from. It couldn't be far away because he was clear, but he couldn't see anything out of the ordinary. He had never heard that sound before. It almost sounded like an animal, but what kind of animal could it be? After feeding all his animals, he went into the barn to prepare his tractor. That was harvest day for his crops, and he would start with the corn. He was about to leave when he heard a loud scream. It was Mary asking him to stop. It turns out there was something on the ground near the tractor. When they got closer, they saw it was a kitten and it looked sick. Hans almost ran over the poor animal. The kitten had strange marks on his ears and it was clearly underfed. He thought that the kitten must have fought with another cat, but before Hans could continue with his train of thought, his other daughter Giselle came running. She had found something in the cornfield. But before we learn what they found, don't forget to like this video to help it reach 5K likes and subscribe to the channel. Hans got back on his tractor and drove into the cornfield. The place was just on the other side of his house, so it wasn't too far away. As he got closer, he noticed small round things on the field. They were eggs. At this point, Bonnie had reached Hans and the girls, interested to find out what was going on. When she saw the eggs, she asked, "How is that possible?" Hans was about to speak when they all heard the same strange sound he had heard before. This entire time, the sound was coming from the field. As they took a closer look at the eggs, it seemed they were about to hatch. Hans wanted to get rid of them, so he decided to hop on his tractor and use that, but the girls stopped him. Eventually, Hans gave up on the idea of destroying the eggs and suggested that they try to save them. They found 20 eggs in total, so even if the crops were gone, maybe they could get something out of the eggs. However, Hans had no idea what he was getting into. Bonnie, on the other hand, had a bad feeling about the eggs. She wondered what animal they came from and how they got there. What if they were snake eggs? She didn't want any animals to get hurt, but she couldn't raise snakes either. Hans didn't share her concerns though. He said the eggs looked like chicken eggs, so there was nothing to worry about. The girls fetched a large black canvas to protect the eggs, and everyone went back to work. The next day, Hans woke up to a strange noise. However, it wasn't the same thing he heard yesterday. He ran to the window to see what it was, and when he looked out at the field, he couldn't believe what was happening. Mary and Giselle were out there. Bonnie also woke up and she was furious, so she ran to the field to bring her daughters in. But as soon as Bonnie saw what the eggs were doing, her anger faded. The girls had brought some hay from the barn and made a little nest around the eggs. It melted Bonnie's heart, and instead of shouting, she praised her daughters for taking such good care of the eggs. Hans was also very proud of them for taking good care of the eggs. Then, Giselle was looking at one of the eggs and she noticed a small crack in it. She cried with joy and held it up for Mary to see. But instead of being happy, Mary was very sad and she started crying. She didn't want the eggs to break. Mary was too young to understand that the eggs were hatching, so Bonnie had to explain it to her. Mary was still sad though, so they took her back inside so she could focus on the kitten they had found yesterday. The rest of the day was uneventful, but a few days later, things would change. The canvas had done an excellent job of keeping the eggs protected from the weather and from predators. But the eggs began to crack, and they would start hatching on any moment. On the fourth day, the time had finally come. Hans went to check the eggs as he did every day, and he noticed that one was already empty. He called his daughters and waited for the others to hatch all together. The wait was longer than expected, and the girls almost lost their patience when finally 2 more eggs began to move. They cracked. Slowly but surely, a small animal hatched. They had never seen anything like this before. Hans couldn't believe his eyes. Of all the animals, he never expected that. He called his wife to come quickly, but he could no longer contain his emotions. He couldn't help himself and began to cry. Bonnie asked what was wrong, and Hans pointed to the animals. Bonnie immediately knew what was going on and comforted her husband. She was also very moved when she saw what was coming out of those eggs. The animals were peacock cubs, and when Hans was little, he used to take care of peacocks. He even had one as a pet, and the bird was his best friend growing up. After he died, Hans never took care of a peacock again. Until now, because Hans wanted to keep these peacock cubs. Bonnie put a stop to that though. There wasn't enough room at the farm to take care of 20 peacocks. In the end, they decided to just keep 2 peacocks and take the rest to a sanctuary so they could receive the care they needed. Isn't that such a great story? What are the odds that it would be peacocks in those eggs? Let us know what you think in the comments. Also, don't forget to like this video, share it, and subscribe for more. See you next time.